The billionaire's secretary reveals the secret she kept for 5 years. I ran from him, the cold-hearted billionaire who shattered my heart. I built a whole new life for myself, guarding a secret I swore he'd never, ever discover. Our son. But after 6 years, fate has a funny way of showing up, and mine just brought my ex-boss back to my doorstep. Only this time, the ruthless CEO I remember is gone, replaced by a man who's desperate for forgiveness and for the family he never knew he had. His name was Julian Croft, and he lived in a fortress of glass and steel that loomed over the city. He didn't just run his empire, he commanded it. In his world, people were pawns, and every deal was a war to be won. And I was his executive assistant, Elara Vance, the one who managed the chaos just outside his gilded office door. For 2 years, I was a ghost in his machine, efficient, invisible, and completely forgettable. But then there was one night, a business trip to Chicago, rain lashing against the hotel window, and the lines we'd drawn so carefully just blurred. The calculating CEO vanished, and for a few stolen hours, I saw the man underneath the one with a lonely fire in his eyes. He talked about dreams he'd given up on, about a different life he could have lived. And I, so foolishly, believed I was finally seeing the real him. I thought he was finally seeing me as more than just an asset on a balance sheet. The next morning, it was gone. He was colder than ever, his words clipped, his gaze dismissing me entirely. He'd built the wall around himself twice as high. The heartbreak was a silent, crushing weight. I couldn't stay. I couldn't be the ghost in his life, haunted by a moment he'd clearly already forgotten. So I resigned, packed what little I had into 2 suitcases, and just disappeared. 2 weeks later, in a quiet little town hundreds of miles from his world, I stared at 2 pink lines on a pregnancy test. And right then, I made a promise. My child would grow up surrounded by love, not by the cold, sterile ambition of the father he would never know. His name is Noah, and for the last 6 years, he's been my entire world. 6 years can really change a person. The timid assistant who used to tremble under Julian Croft's gaze was long gone. I poured all my grief and all my hope into something beautiful. I opened Blossom and Branch, a little floral design studio that, against all odds, was actually a success. My life was small, but it was finally mine. It was filled with the scent of fresh peonies, the warmth of my small apartment, and the sound of my son's laughter. And then the past came calling. An email landed in my inbox with the unmistakable logo of Croft Enterprises. They were hosting their annual multi-million-dollar charity gala, the social event of the year, and my humble studio had been recommended for the floral contract. The irony was so bitter I almost laughed out loud. My assistant was practically vibrating with excitement, calling it the opportunity of a lifetime. For me, it felt like a ghost story I wasn't ready to reread. I told myself I wouldn't even see him. A man like Julian Croft doesn't bother with flower arrangements. I took the job. It was too big to say no to, a chance to secure a better future for my son. The day before the gala, I was on site, my hands steady as I directed my team and arranged cascades of white orchids. And then he was there. He was doing a final walkthrough, flanked by a team of people hanging on his every word. He looked exactly the same, impeccably dressed, radiating that untouchable power. His eyes, the same stormy gray I remembered all too well, swept across the ballroom. They passed right over me without a flicker of recognition. I was just part of the decor. The sting of it was sharp, a painful reminder of who he'd always been. He stopped by a large centerpiece, his finger tracing the petal of a lily. Exquisite, he murmured to his associate, his voice that same low timbre that once whispered very different words to me in the dark. He was impressed by the work, but the artist was invisible. That was for the best, I told myself. It had to be. On the morning of the gala, disaster struck. The custom vases for the head table were delivered with hairline cracks, useless. The only replacements were back at my studio, but Noah's school had a half day, and my babysitter had just called in sick. I had no choice. I had to take him with me for a quick run to Croft Tower. Just for a minute, sweetie. I promised. You can wait with my assistant, Maya, right in the lobby. We were rushing for the main elevators when the doors slid open, and out walked Julian Croft. He was on his phone, barking orders, his expression a mask of pure irritation. He was moving so fast, with so much purpose, that he didn't see the small boy in his path until the very last second. He stopped short, barely avoiding a collision. "Watch it!" he snapped before his eyes finally fell on my son. And then he froze. The whole world just seemed to stop turning. Noah, my sweet, shy Noah, wasn't even looking at the giant figure in front of him. He was on his knees, meticulously lining up the sugar packets from a low coffee table into a perfect, symmetrical row. It's a nervous habit, something he does when he feels overwhelmed, this quiet little need for order in the chaos, a habit I had only ever seen in one other person, Julian. Julian's gaze flickered from Noah's focused hands to his face, to his eyes. My son has my smile, but he has his father's eyes, that same unique, stormy gray, so intense and unnervingly old for a 6-year-old. The phone dropped from Julian's hand, clattering onto the marble floor. The sound echoed in the sudden, deafening silence. "Who is this boy?" he asked, his voice low and stripped of all its usual authority, replaced by something I couldn't place. Something raw. My heart was hammering against my ribs. He's my son," I stammered, pulling Noah close to me. I mumbled an apology and practically ran, dragging my son away from the man whose world was crashing into ours. I didn't look back, but I could feel his eyes burning into my back. The seed of suspicion had been planted, and I knew, with a terrifying certainty, that Julian Croft was a man who would stop at nothing to get an answer. His obsession had a new focus, and it wasn't a company or a rival anymore. It was a 6-year-old boy with his eyes. He didn't call, he didn't send a lawyer, he came himself. 2 nights after the gala, long after I'd closed up shop, a sharp knock echoed through my quiet studio. I opened the door to find Julian Croft on the cobblestone step, silhouetted by the streetlights. He looked different without the corporate armor, just a man in a dark coat, his face etched with an emotion I had never, ever seen on him before: pain. I spent 6 years conquering cities and crushing my competitors. He started, his voice raspy. "I never lost, not once. But you took something from me I never even knew I had." I lifted my chin, the fear coiling in my stomach, turning into protective fire. I took nothing. I protected my son. He stepped inside, and the small space instantly felt suffocating. "Don't lie to me, Alara." "Not anymore." I ran the dates. I looked at his birth certificate online. "I hired someone who confirmed you haven't been with anyone else." It wasn't a hard equation to solve. He took another step, his voice dropping to a tormented whisper. "He's mine, isn't he? He has my eyes." The accusation, spoken so softly, shattered my defenses. The tears I'd held back for years finally fell. "Yes," I choked out. "Yes, he's yours." Why? That single word was loaded with 6 years of anger and confusion and betrayal. "Why?" I shot back, my voice rising. I did it to protect him. From you. From the world you live in, where feelings are weaknesses and children are liabilities. The man I knew would have seen him as a complication, a threat to his perfect, orderly life. I was not going to let my son grow up feeling like a burden to a father who never wanted him in the first place. His face just crumpled. The rage I expected never came. In its place was a devastation so deep it actually shook me. "You didn't give me a choice," he said, his voice cracking. "You decided who I was. You decided what kind of father I would be. You made that choice for me. You don't get to just erase me from his life." The raw agony in his voice wasn't a ruthless billionaire. It was the sound of a man who just discovered a gaping wound in his soul, realizing he'd lost 6 years he could never get back. I expected a war. I braced for lawyers, custody battles, and ugly threats. That was the Julian Croft I knew. But it seemed like that man was finally gone. That night in the studio had broken something in him, and in his place was someone I didn't recognize at all, a man who looked completely lost. He didn't fight me. Instead, he just asked, Can I meet him properly?" It was the start of a slow, fragile truce. He met us at the park the next Saturday. He didn't introduce himself as Noah's father, just as Julian. He was clumsy and awkward. It was almost strange watching this man who could command a boardroom of 100 people have no idea how to talk to one small boy. He'd brought a ridiculously expensive, complicated drone as a gift, which Noah promptly ignored in favor of a shiny rock he found by the swings. Julian looked so utterly defeated, and for the first time, I felt a pang of something other than fear for him. But he didn't give up. He started learning. He started showing up not with expensive gifts, but with his time. He found out Noah was obsessed with dinosaurs, and a week later he showed up with a book not from a store, but from a paleontologist he knew, filled with real field sketches. He didn't push. He just sat on the park bench, watching Noah play, asking him quiet questions about his day, his friends, his favorite color. He was learning how to be a father, one clumsy, uncertain step at a time. One evening, he came by my studio just as I was closing up. "I was a fool, Alara," he said, staring at a bucket of unsold roses instead of me. I spent my whole life building an empire of things, collecting companies, buildings, successes. I thought I had everything, but I had absolutely nothing. He finally met my gaze, and his eyes were filled with a sincere, gut-wrenching regret. "He's the only thing that's ever mattered. And you were the only one who ever saw the real me, even for a second. I'm sorry. I am so, so sorry for the man I was." It wasn't a magic fix. The scars were still there. But we started talking. Then we started having dinner, the three of us. We almost looked like a family. One night, while we were watching a movie, Noah fell asleep with his head in Julian's lap. Julian looked over at me, his eyes wet with unshed tears. And in that silence, something passed between us. An understanding. This was our second chance, not to go back to what we were, but to build something new, something better, on the foundation of the secret that once tore us apart. Our story was no fairy tale, but for the first time, it felt like it could still have a happy ending. What do you do when the man who broke your world becomes the only one who can piece it back together? Our journey was really just beginning, filled with so much uncertainty, but also so much hope. If you love this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more. What do you think should happen next for Julian, Alara, and Noah? Let me know in the comments below.